A little bit different. Welcome to another episode of Unbeatable. I have been searching for a long time for a guest like Jenny Alexander, someone who has the courage to be real and honest about the death of a marriage. And I will tell you in this episode, I think this can be more painful than the death of a loved one, because you have to look in the mirror and you also have to live with the shame and the guilt of a marriage that didn't work. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn things over to my guest, Jenny Alexander, and we're just going to get real with each other about the pain of a divorce and what it takes to be unbeatable and put your life back together again. Hey, before we get into this interview with Jenny, I want to tell you the wait's almost over. We have just a couple more episodes of Unbeatable before I officially transition to this television show that we're launching. And here's a video to tell you more about what's coming up in just a couple of weeks. Check this out, will you? Hey everyone, today I've got some big news to share. After 3 years of a weekly podcast interviewing some amazing guests, I'm going to make a huge transition. Man, your support to me over the last 3 years has meant the world. But as we move forward, I'm going to replace the Unbeatable podcast, both audio and video, with a television show. You don't have to live in the local area to watch this television show, because the television show is going to broadcast on the internet. It'll be available on Apple TV, on Roku, on Amazon. In fact, I'm launching an entire television channel called Jeff Strucker Ministries. Now, this new venture, it aims to empower lives. We're going to try to inspire people's faith, and I want to continue to try to make an impact, but this new venture is designed to make an eternal impact. And if you'll stay with me, and the entire Unbeatable Army will come with me, together we'll continue to inspire and uplift people. We'll create change that will last in people's lives over a lifetime, and we'll try to do something that will shake the foundations of heaven, that will matter into eternity. I just want to tell you thanks. Thanks for being so loyal to the podcast, and thanks for your continued support. Now, stay tuned for more updates about this television show, about the television channel that I'm creating to replace the Unbeatable podcast called Jeff Strucker Ministries. Can't wait for you to see it as we get ready to launch it in just a few weeks. See you guys. And now, the interview with Jenny Alexander.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey Jenny, thank you for joining me from way up north in Ontario, Canada today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I have been trying to find a guest like you for some time, because there is part of your story that I think a lot of people are going to connect with today.
I'm happy to share.
And we're going to talk about the divorce that you went through and how this shook your life. And I've said many times in the past that I think people who go through a painful divorce, it's worse than death. We've had guests on this show that have lost family, lost friends, lost children, and they've talked about the pain that they go through. But in divorce, not only do you go through the death of a dream, but you also go through this challenge of, what did I do wrong, and is it my fault? And
Yeah.
I really wanted to interview an unbeatable woman like you, who's had to put her life back together after being married to let's just call it what it is, a serial adulterer.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about your first marriage? Describe how you guys met, and what things were like back in the romance days and the engagement before you got married.
Okay. Well, when I got married, first time, I was in my mid-20s, And I mean, that's not super young, but it's young enough. Not, you don't always know what you want. You're not always sure of yourself at that age. Some people are, but not everyone is. I sure wasn't. And so, when I met my first husband, I was not the most confident person that I could have been. And so I settled. And because there were red flags that, like, when we were dating, there were red flags that that should have made me run the other way. Things like a lack of responsibility. The communication was okay, but not the best. But it was mostly the lack of responsibility. Money management wasn't the best either. And so those things should have made me run in the other direction. I know that at one point, my dad had talked to me and, expressed some concerns about the relationship. And I heard what he was saying, and I knew that they were true. But um, my young self wanted to be loved, wanted a marriage, and I also was afraid that I would never have the opportunity to find someone else. So I better snag what I had while I could. And so we met at church, and you can meet some wonderful people at church
Yeah,
for sure.
sure. Absolutely.
But just because you meet someone at church doesn't mean they're the right person for you necessarily. It doesn't mean they're who they say they are either.
Also
I
true.
mean,
Yep.
I mean, I don't want people to get like all paranoid and think, oh, you can't trust anyone at church. That's absolutely not true. But you just need to be aware that not everyone is who they say they are necessarily. That was the case with me. I didn't necessarily find out about that until uh, later in the marriage, but yeah. So we met at church. We dated for 2 years. There was actually one point very early on in the marriage where um, something happened and it really annoyed me. He had a daughter, and I actually ended up looking after his daughter at one of his work functions. So I was basically like the baby, and I was mad enough to leave him, but I didn't, and I really probably should have. But anyway, we kept going, and again, it was that whole determination. I want to be loved. I want to be married, and I've got someone, so let's make this work. And again, I was not perfect. Um, but anyway, so yeah, we kept going. We got engaged at the 2 year point, and we got married, and we had a pretty decent sized wedding. And um, anyway, it was the first year was okay. Was the best. I mean, some people say the first year is the hardest. For us, the first year was probably the best, and I say that loosely because in the first year there were starting to be cracks, which really
Wow.
isn't
Yeah.
surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had ignored the red flags and, kept going, didn't pay attention to the red flags. It's not surprising that those, in hindsight, it's not surprising there were issues early in the marriage. But yeah. Um,
Well, let me stop for a second and ask to explain a few of the things that you just
mhm,
mentioned. There are
yeah.
obviously people listening right now who have gone through something similar.
Mhm,
Um, and there are people that can resonate with everything that you're saying. Like, hey, I was that girl who wanted to be loved. I was the one who was rushing towards the altar. And you mentioned that people in your life, even your dad, noticed some things about this guy.
yeah.
Tell us your first husband's name.
I refer to him in my books as Jeff, so we can
Okay,
call him
let's
Jeff.
call him Jeff.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, for the listener out there, I just said first husband, which already hints at there is a happy ending to this story.
Yes.
We're going to get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
But dad noticed some things, maybe other people in your life noticed some things about Jeff. And there's somebody who's driving and listening to this right now thinking, okay, I don't understand, Jenny. If people started warning you about Jeff, why did you go through it anyway?
Yeah.
And I recognize that parents, friends, they can often see something about a person that you're in love with that you
Yeah.
can't see because of that
Definitely.
famous phrase, love is blind. And
Yeah.
you think, yeah, maybe there's some issues with this guy, but I love him so much that we'll be able to work through those issues. When you had some friends in your life that were saying, hey, slow down, girl, maybe you need to think this through, you mentioned that you didn't say this word, but you were kind of desperate and that you thought this might be it because of self-esteem. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Um, well, I guess, yeah, I settled in that relationship because I wasn't sure of myself. I mean, in some ways I was confident, but in other ways I wasn't. I wasn't confident in my lovableness. um, I didn't see my own value back then. If I had have seen my own value back then as a person, just on my own, I would not have settled for that guy.
So, if I heard you correctly, you even knew that you were settling before you went to the altar. You recognized there are some issues here. People were recognizing there's some
Yeah.
issues, but you kind of settled because, and I think you're describing a whole lot of people listening right now. You didn't see your own self-worth, and this may be the only guy who ever loves me, the only guy who ever asked me to marry him. And even though there's a lot of problems, I'm going to go ahead and marry him because I may never find another guy, right?
Yep, that's right.
2 years of engagement. Did I hear you right that you met him at church?
Yeah, we met him at church. Yep.
And of course, with church comes added pressure because there are church people saying, "Hey, you guys look great together. What are you
I
waiting
know.
for? How come you're
I
not married
know.
already?" Right?
And I mean, looking back, I can see that I put pressure on him too, because I mean, I don't know, maybe but anyway, I do think I put pressure on him too to, I want to get married, and maybe he really did, I don't know, but anyway, you know, I think that's a factor too. But yeah.
Okay, now we're 2 years into the engagement. It's time for us to get married. You already know that things are not perfect. And then you described the first year. I heard your language. It was okay.
It was okay.
Most people say the first year was awesome because they're in the honeymoon phase, or they say
Yeah.
the first year was awful because they had to learn how to live with another grown adult.
Yeah.
Very, very, I don't know that I've ever heard somebody say out loud, the first year of marriage was just okay. So
I would
describe a
say,
little bit more about okay.
yeah, well, the first month or two were probably pretty good. Our honeymoon phase was very short. But yeah, there were money issues were cropping up in that, and like expenses that I didn't know about came into light, and I felt like I had been betrayed already. I didn't even know there was nothing said about affairs or anything like that. I just felt betrayed because I felt, well, I can't trust him because he's,
He's
money
lying about the
issues.
money.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, there's just I know in-law situations can be interesting, and ours definitely was. I didn't really get along that great with my in-laws, and so that was an added stress. And I was also actually a step parent, and that was a struggle too. In the end, um, there was definitely an adjustment of being a step parent. We had her every weekend. So again, that was an added stress. And I remember thinking, is marriage supposed to be this difficult? Everything was difficult. It didn't seem like it should be that difficult.
Yeah. The answer to everyone who's asking right now, is marriage work? Yes, absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work. It's a lot of hard work, but it
Yeah.
shouldn't be only hard work, right? There
Mm-mm.
should be some fun, some good parts about being married.
Yeah. And communication is important, and that was lacking.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
no one shows up at the altar thinking this lady that I'm marrying, this guy that I'm marrying is going to dump me one day, is going to have an affair on me one day. Everybody shows up believing this marriage is the one and it's going to last forever. And then the statistics say a lot of marriages don't last forever. You're how far into the marriage when you start realizing there's a lot more than just lack of communication or maybe even lack of responsibility? When did
Yeah.
you start to learn about the affairs?
It was quite a while into the marriage. So we got married in 1998. It wasn't until 2008 that I learned about the quote unquote apparent first affair. And yeah, so and that was only because the other woman had told someone um at our church about what had happened between the two of them. And yeah, he never would have told me. I'm convinced he never ever would have told me about any affairs.
Okay, so would you, if I realize this is painful and
Yeah.
delicate, but would you just give us when did the affair start? How long did the affairs last? Obviously, you find out about it the worst possible way, somebody telling you about it later, but
Yeah. Well, actually, he ended up telling me over the phone because he was too chicken to tell me in person.
okay,
Yeah.
so when did the
Yeah.
affairs start? How did they
Uh,
start? How
I don't
long? How
really kn
many?
Yeah, I don't really know when exactly they started. Like that was the first time I ever heard about one. There were at least 4 other ones, but I don't know how long they all lasted, when, how, I mean, he was, even when I found out about that first affair, he was cheating on her with other people too. So, it was a big mess. So I don't really know exactly how many. I don't know exactly how long. But yeah, it was just very messed up.
10 years into a marriage, for those 10 years, did you assume that he was being faithful?
Not necessarily. I remember actually in around 2007, I started getting these little nagging thoughts like, I don't really trust him. And at one point, I looked at his phone. Somehow he didn't have it on him. And I managed to sneak into his phone. And I saw a text message from some woman asking him to go for drinks. And I'm like, he doesn't drink. What? Or not, like he wasn't a regular drinker. So it was weird. Anyway, I did tell him. I had eventually, years later, I told him about that text message. He said, I don't know anyone by this girl's name, and completely lied about it. But yeah,
You you finally find out about the fairs, but the first one, somebody mentioned it to you. You said that he admitted over the phone. When did you find out about the whole ugly truth? How did you find out?
well, I had suspicions that things weren't right. We had started going to counseling, and but again, like I was feeling like there's something not right, and I started doing my own sleuthing. I went through our cell phone bills, and I was able to see that he was texting people in the middle of the night, like all these same numbers over and over again. And I didn't hire a private investigator. I became one myself. So I ended up texting one of the numbers and saying, "Why is your number on my husband's cell phone?" And it was this woman who I found her on his Facebook page. Anyway, she had lied about knowing him, but I knew she was lying. And I also he would pull it because we were trying, after finding out about the first affair, we had tried to make it work. I didn't leave. I could have left. I probably should have. And so anyway, it was pulling teeth, but he did give me some of his passwords, to try to be transparent or whatever. But anyway, at one point, I went on you remember MSN? I don't know,
Yes, I
the
remember.
chat.
Sure. Yeah, I
I
remember way
went
back
on
in the day.
there. Yeah, I went on there pretending to be him. And I ended up chatting to another, I think it was the same woman actually that I texted. And I asked her how the winter was going, and she said that, it's fine. I said, "Oh, it's not bad for me. My wife and I moved into to a condo, so we don't have to shovel or anything. We get a lot of snow in Nova Scotia, which is where we live. Anyway, so and then she immediately ended the conversation. So I did my own sleuthing, and it felt like I was living it in someone else's life. It was very surreal to be going through all that.
You found the affairs, did you say 9 or 10 years into the marriage? And you stayed married for a while
Yeah.
after this. For how long?
Um, I think another year. I left in 2011. Like, so the first affair, quote unquote, I found out about in 2008. Then in 2010, I started doing my own sleuthing, and that's when I found it. Like it was like months before he could, even when I put the cell phone bills in front of him and said, you're texting these people in the middle of the night and everything. And um, yeah, it took months for him to admit to other affairs. So yeah, would have been 2010. I finally left in 2011. I had started going to see a counselor, and she was, very encouraging and getting me to think about my options and helping me to see, she even used the word emotional abuse, like, because the neglect was severe and just anyway, she helped me to see that I had an option. I didn't have to stay in that, you know,
I'm
and yeah,
I'm fascinated by your language right now. I think you're already starting to answer a question that I'm dying to know. Um, you described how you longed for a relationship, how you didn't have a lot of self-worth. You didn't think that this was another one was going to come along, but at some point, you finally learn about the affair. He admits to it. It sounds like over the phone. And then you stay married to him for almost 2 more years. And in those last 2 years, you're suspicious. You're starting to do some investigating. And all that you investigate is confirming not just affair, but multiple affairs. And there are some people that have, incredibly high self-esteem that are saying, why did you stick around? Why didn't you just dump them? There are
yeah,
others that are saying, I know of women who have
mhm,
been married to the same guy for 55 years and
yeah,
he's had 100 affairs and
yeah,
she's aware of all 100 of those affairs, but she stayed married anyway. And there are people scratching their head at that one, like, why would anyone stay married after knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt
yeah,
that there's been infidelity?
yeah,
Can you take a moment and just talk about
yeah.
that for people?
For me, um, I was actually terrified to be on my own. I didn't think I could handle being on my own. And so that is and plus, I didn't want to be divorced.
Yeah,
No one
nobody
wants,
nobody wants
nobody
that
does.
next to their name, right? The
No,
lady,
I
look
didn't
at
want
her,
to be
there she is, the
divorced.
lady that just got a divorce.
That's right. So it was a combination of being terrified to being on my own. Like, I mean, even before I got married, I got my own apartment. I lived on my own before. So I had some level of confidence, but just my self-worth was low. And so obviously I could make it on my own, but by that point, I was so beaten down that I didn't know how I would ever be able to manage on my own. And so that is largely why I stayed. Plus, I was afraid of being divorced. And then on top of that, I was also afraid of what other people would think.
Yeah.
And anyway, there's several reasons why I stayed.
That's it right there. The whole reason I
Mhm,
wanted to do an interview with you, Jenny, is for what
mhm,
you're saying now.
mhm.
Many people, if there's a death of a loved one in your life, you don't have to worry about what people are going to say about you behind your back. Many people, when there's a death of a loved one, you don't have to question your actions. But when it's a divorce, man, all of those painful emotions and then the conversations about you when you're not in the room and what people are going to think about you and all of those things. I'm convinced it takes more courage. You are more unbeatable if you pick your life back up and put it back together after a divorce than after death. And I'm being very literal with my language right now for everybody who's listening, because again, most people, the death you had nothing to do with, you couldn't stop. If you could have, you would have. But when it comes to divorce, it often feels like it's your fault. And for women whose husband has had an affair, it's hard not to imagine that people are thinking something about you, like you're the reason your husband had an affair,
That's right. Like
and
I'm not, yeah, I already felt not good enough. So, gee,
that's going to hang over your head for a
yeah,
long, long time.
yeah,
Thank God that you have a Christian counselor it sounds like a good enough counselor that's starting to
yes,
give you some advice and reminding you about your
yeah.
self-worth.
And she was a Christian counselor. She was very good. And you would think sometimes, well, Christians often say God hates divorce, but I think what he hates more is abuse.
Yeah,
Be-
the
you know,
elements that lead up to a divorce, right?
that's
Like
right.
infidelity or the kind of raw selfishness or
Yeah,
violence or whatever.
yeah,
Um, we're going to bring this up just because this is part of the world that you live in. It's part of the world that I live in. It's not where all of our listeners live, but when it comes to the church, divorce has an even greater stigma about it. And it's one of those, yeah, we recognize that an adultery, according to the Bible, is
Yes.
grounds for divorce, but it
Yes.
still feels like you are a bad person if you get a divorce. And
That's
people
right.
can
Yeah.
talk about you, treat you like that,
Yeah.
even though you did absolutely nothing wrong.
Right.
So in your case, not only do you have to figure out how to go on with your life after the death of a marriage, but also how to deal with criticism or kind of the views that people might have about you after it's over with. Can you tell everybody how, what it finally took to say that's it, it's over, and then what you
Yeah.
had to go through after making that decision?
Yeah. Like I knew probably a month before I left that I was gonna leave. So I didn't make a snap decision. And at the time, even though I was a churchgoer, I wasn't a Christian per se. I am now. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I would still pray. I would still read my Bible, and I could see in Bible verses how God like valued people. And I'm like, my husband does not value me at all. And that was almost like further permission to just like, this is not God's best for me. Um, and and that helped me to get the courage to leave. And I remember at one point, one day, it was February 9th, 2011. It was I think it was in the morning. I'd been I was working at the time full time as a secretary, and I was during this period of time I was taking a lot of time off work because it was just hard to to work and with all this going on. Anyway, I called my parents one morning and I told them things weren't good. I said, and I was telling them, and my dad immediately asked because they knew about the first affair, and he was like, "Were there more affairs?" I said, "Yes." And then all of a sudden I just said, "I have to leave and I have to leave right now." And they came and got me a few hours later. And a really hilarious thing about the day I left. So I made that morning a big huge pot of baked beans. For some reason I had never made baked beans before, but I did that day and my ex hated baked beans. So he came home that day to me having left and a big pot of baked beans
Left a
for
big
him.
pot of baked beans for him. I'm gone, and here's your baked beans.
Yeah, that's right. And do with them whatever you want.
Something changed inside of you, and you decided, I am worth more than this
Yeah,
miserable marriage that I'm
that's right.
in. I hope the counselor had something to do with that. I talk often about counseling and encourage people who are struggling to get counseling, but something had to change deep inside of you to force you to say, this is not the way that I want to live the rest of my life. But I also want people to hear you. If you spent a month thinking about it, that tells me that you went through the cost of what this was going to take out of you for leaving him. I don't know Nova Scotia. I don't know Canadian geography. So I don't know how big of a community this is. But I know divorce in a small town, everybody knows about it and they know
Yeah,
about it in about 2 seconds.
right, right.
So what's Nova Scotia like? Does everybody on the street corner know you just went through a divorce when you're getting groceries or buying gas?
No, it wasn't that big or that small, I mean. So, and I have to say, the church that I was going to, the majority of people were amazingly supportive because they knew our story. Um, because actually one thing I didn't say is, because I don't want to paint a bad picture of church people because, there's really wonderful church people, but um in addition to being part of the church, my had been an elder at the church.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. So
so when they
there
found
it
out about,
goes.
yeah, when they found out about the affair, he had to publicly step down. So the
Hmm.
whole church knew. So,
Which
um,
makes everybody in the church up in your business, whether they want to be or you want them to be
right,
or not. Yeah.
right. But I mean, we had a lot of support, especially because we tried to make it work. And I say that kind of loosely because he didn't really try. But anyway, so yeah, by and large, the church was very good. There were a couple people that were a little hard, took a little hard stance on God hates divorce, but they did come around because they realized, I was so much better off after I left him. Um, but yeah, does that answer
Yeah, it
your question?
does. Let's talk about what it looks like to piece your life back together.
Yeah.
There are, I'm certain, plenty of people listening to this episode who have gone through divorce, and now they are starting to remember what this pain was like of just getting to the moment of saying, "That's it, the marriage is over with. The marriage has already died, and now I have to figure out a way to move on." And if you're afraid of being single, and also it's very public because of who your husband is, all of those things go along with it. But I've known more than a few people that have immediately bounced back into another relationship, a terrible decision, and rebounded into a really bad relationship just because they wanted the pain of the divorce to go away. You didn't do that.
No.
W-
No, I was
Yours was very, very different from that, and I applaud you for it, Jenny. But I
yeah,
would like people to know what the next 9 years of your life was like.
yeah. It was not easy, and I would say I was stuck in my the healing process for years and years because I did a thing that I don't recommend. I followed my ex on social media, and he seemed so normal. It's like, well, what about the guy I was married to? He wasn't normal at all. And so he seemed to all normal and healthy and of course social media can lie. But yeah, I was really stuck for a long, long time because I wasn't focusing on my pain. I was too afraid to face my pain. So instead I focused on him and what he was doing or not doing. And yeah, I was stuck in that place for a really, really long time. And it wasn't until 2016, which would have been, so I left, the divorce was final in 2011. So 5 years later, it took me 5 years to get the courage to go to divorce care. And actually, that was a very positive step forward for me because I had other people who really understood what I was going through. None of my friends at the time had, I guess one had, but, and that's a whole other story. But turns out the friends that I had at the time weren't actually the best friends either. But those friends hadn't, most of them hadn't been through a divorce. They were in a different life place than me. So it was hard to get this. I mean, I guess they did their best to be supportive, and my parents were all like, they're always supportive. But going to divorce care was the best thing I did. And actually before that, there was a point where in Googling my ex, I thought I saw a picture. It looked like he was getting married again. And I was just like floored. I actually had a panic attack right then and there. And then I kept having panic attacks. And I finally admitted it to someone. I had been started going to a different church at this point, and I admitted it to someone that I was having these panic attacks, and I was not getting over my divorce very well. And she encouraged me to go to a prayer group that night. And the ladies at that prayer group, they prayed for me and they loved me. And that was actually the real turning point. And then I went to divorce care after that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is priceless because this is
Mm.
the part of the interview that I really wanted people to hear. After all of the pain of the marriage that fell apart, like
Yeah.
you didn't go to the altar hoping that it was going to end like this,
No, no.
and all of the pain of that, plus a very public divorce because of his role in the community and in the church. But I wanted people to hear about your friends because if they're friends with both you and your husband and you go through a divorce, now your friends are stuck in them. Like everything about your life is turned upside down. And obviously, some people will lose a lot of friends. In your case, I heard you say that you left the church. I've known more than a few people that, they poured their life into the church, and then after divorce, their husband stayed in the church, so they felt they had to go somewhere else. So their ex-wife stayed in the church, and now I have to go find another church because I can't even sit in the same room with them. Like nothing but bad stuff happens after a divorce.
I know.
And some people run to another relationship instead
Yeah.
of working through it.
That's true. And I was too messed up to do that.
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't handle it.
But it also sounds like you were kind of cyber stalking him and hoping that I don't know if this is what I'm about to say is accurate or not, but are you just hoping that his life is miserable because your life is miserable and you want to see him struggling or suffering for his role in the divorce? Why are
I
you
don't
cyber stalking him?
I get a part of me just wanted to make sure that he was still not normal. And he was seeming normal and I was like, but I don't get
Yeah.
it. But then again, for like how 10 years he hid his life from me.
Sure. So it's going to be
So
super easy to do that on social media for people that
that's
don't know
right.
you, let alone to do it for his wife who does know you.
Yeah, so I think I was just looking for like some sign that he's still the same weirdo that I was married
Yeah.
to.
You spent 5 years just struggling before you even got into this divorce care group and had some people start to love you and serve you and work with you through it. Obviously, for people that are listening now that are going through this or may end up going through this one day,
Yeah.
don't wait 5 years to
No,
learn what
please
Jenny
don't.
learned.
Yeah,
Um,
please don't.
because what did you learn after those 5 years in the divorce care that made it I'm trying to get to the point of people hearing you're starting to get healthy enough that you would be willing to consider a relationship again, but that doesn't happen for a long time for you.
No. Um, so like divorce care, it helped me to normalize everything I was going through. Like,
And I want to make sure that the audience hears this. When you say normalize, you're hearing it's not just you and you're not a bad person or you're not unlovable,
yeah,
Jenny. Lots of people have gone through or are
yeah.
going through what you went through.
Yep, there's other people that are going through the same level of pain. And actually, it was there that I learned I had to actually face the pain. I was afraid to face the pain, I think, because I was afraid of what it would say about me. But yeah, but basically, I was learning that, the pain is normal and it's okay. And you can feel it and it's you have to feel it.
I went out searching for guests for this interview who not only went through divorce, but went through a divorce because of adultery on purpose, because there is a moment that you have to ask the question, is it my fault? Did I do something wrong? And a person who doesn't ask that question is not at all ready for another relationship. Some people are so afraid that they'll never ask that question. But the scary part about that question is the answer might be, well, I did something wrong. Obviously, nothing excuses my spouse had an affair, but I could have done things differently and until you get to that point, I don't really think you're ready for another
Probably not.
relationship.
Yeah,
So
probably not.
somehow divorce care got you ready to face the pain. What did they
Yeah.
do to get you ready?
Well, it's not a 12-step program, but I don't know, they just showed videos every week, um, about the healing process. And I had people care about me, which was huge because my own husband didn't care about me. And just being in a community, and of course, my parents cared, but they have to. Yeah, that's right. But it was just so refreshing to have people actually care about me. And I guess that made me see I was worth caring about or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Some people, after a divorce that's this painful, are going to turn into the old spinster. They're never, ever going to open their heart up to another person ever again. And it's not right, but it's easy to understand why they would get that way. You were very careful, but I've already hinted at it. You are now remarried, but I want people to hear what does it take for you to get to the point that you feel like I'm ready to trust myself and trust another man that much again?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, even when I was on the way out of that marriage, the first marriage, I knew I wanted a healthy marriage someday. I knew I wasn't ready for that yet, but I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted a good relationship. And so, I can't remember when I started this practice, but I started to make a list of all the things I wanted in a future husband. Yep. And when you can. And actually, another thing that helped me get to that place is the counselor that I had been going to. She encouraged me to dream again. And like, I couldn't come up with much at the time, but, it just started the wheels turning about, what's the future, what the future could look like. But yeah, so it was the permission to dream again, but making that list was like enlarging my ability to dream about, wow, I could do it right the second time. And I also made a list, not just of what I wanted, what I didn't want. So I would know what to look, what red flags to look out for. I was I had a list of about like 50 things that I wanted in a future husband. So
You don't have to go over the whole list, but I'm fascinated. I'm sure a bunch of people are wondering what was on your list? Like, what were some of the top items of I don't want X, but I do want
yeah,
Y in the next person I'm going to give my heart to?
well, I wanted someone who was a true believer, a
Okay.
true Christian believer. That was number one. I wanted someone that was good managing money, someone that was a good communicator, someone who had like a really wonderful parents that would like me, or um, and what else did I have on there? I can't even remember all the things
Well, it's
now. Those
okay.
are,
What was on your do not want list?
do not okay. Someone that was poor with money, someone
Hmm.
that smoked, someone that had tattoos. No offense to people with tattoos, that's just
Uh-huh.
not what I wanted. Um, yeah, smoking was a bad thing. Someone that wasn't a heavy drinker. Like I didn't mind occasional drinking, but um, yeah. Oh, and I also wanted one of the things that I wanted someone that was um had a tender heart towards other people and towards me. Yeah, tender-hearted. But yeah, that's there you go. There's some.
I thank you. I asked you this question because if people are paying attention to your language, when you were a 20-year-old girl, you didn't have options. You didn't see enough self-worth that I could even have a list of this is what I want and this is what I don't want in a guy. And then after adultery, multiple affairs, and a divorce, some people are just so closed off to that kind of hurt, never want to get hurt like that again. And the only way to protect myself from ever getting hurt like that again is never open my heart up again. Something really significant changed inside of you from going from that 20-year-old girl that didn't see any self worth and couldn't be selective about the man she's going to marry to a woman who sees enough about herself and enough about her worth to say, no, I am not going to compromise. I'm not going to settle the second time around. And it sounds like a huge transformation from the
It was.
woman who got married the first time
Yeah.
to the woman that got married the second time.
Yeah. The woman who got married the first time and the woman who got married the second time don't even seem like the same people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you find, how did you meet your new husband?
We met online during COVID, the COVID lockdowns.
All right.
And yeah, I had talked to a few men online beforehand, but I didn't actually date anyone until meeting my current husband. I was barely ready to meet him or to date him because well he's been divorced too. So he has heartbreak in his past. Um but he was further along in his healing and he knew to be patient with me. I was running scared from him. Like he was the most gentlemanly man I had ever met. And I could tell that within the first like day or week of emails. Like there's something different about him. And but yeah, even in that first month, even knowing that, I ran from him like 3 times in that first month, but he just kept patiently waiting for me. And at one point he even said, you can keep running if you want. I'll still be here.
Yeah,
He just knew a little bit about what I'd been through, so he
sure.
knew to yeah. But yeah, we met online and we took it very slow. He's an assistant pastor, so he wanted to make sure to bring the right kind of woman into his ministry because his ministry might not survive another divorce and anyway, yeah, we just took it very slow and like communication our communication was super strong and we talked about everything and of course in time you don't spill everything at
Yes,
the outset
definitely.
but
Right.
yeah
How long did it take for you guys to get comfortable enough? If he's already been divorced, you've already been divorced, you know the pain, you both know what's at stake here. And by the way, you were once married to a church elder. Now this guy is a pastor. How long did it take before you two said, I think I might be ready to spend the rest of my life with you?
Um, that we first started to really think about that about a month in.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I know,
I'm
I
I'm
know.
surprised. I just assumed that it would take a long time.
No, it's a
When you
God
know, I
thing.
guess.
It's a God thing, but it took us both kind of by surprise. It took him by surprise because he thought, oh, I was just a friend, and it just kind of blossomed. I mean, we still weren't rushing. We didn't get married until 2 years later, so it's not like, oh, we felt like pretty sure in a month, but and then we just got married a month later. No, we took our time, and we had 3 in-person visits before we got married too.
Yeah.
So
You met online. Are you guys even remotely close to each other? Do you even live close by each other?
we're different provinces in Canada, but it's
Uh-huh.
only like one plane ride away, so it's not that bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did how long into this thing before you guys met each other in person for the first time? If it's COVID, that means
Yeah.
not a lot of travel, not a lot of,
No,
in-person stuff.
it was 5 months, exactly 5 months to the day,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the good stuff. How long have you guys been married now? Tell us about the second marriage. You both
Yeah,
learned a few things on the first one. Tell us
we
what the
did.
second one's like.
So we've been married since June 7th, 2022, which actually, we first met, our very first online conversation was June 7th, 2020. So our wedding date was purposely set for exactly two years later. But um, yeah, this marriage is so much better. We communicate, we're best friends, we share the same interests. We support each other. We're each other's biggest fans, and yeah, it's just so different and refreshing.
There's a lady out there who's in a bad marriage right now, and she knows that her husband's being faithful, but she's not sure she wants to go through the pain of divorce or the shame of people knowing that it didn't work. What would you say to that lady? Or there's a guy out there who's in the same boat right now. What
Yeah.
would you say to that person?
Um, I would say like I would ask them to imagine their life a few years from now, and that's a hard question because obviously I can't make a decision for someone.
Obviously, but just
Yeah, but yeah, what would you like to see in your life like 10 years from now, 5 years from now? Do you want to be in the same situation? Um, what are your values? Like, what means more to you? Like, do you foresee something? It doesn't even necessarily have to be a relationship. Do you foresee a better life in your future? Because you don't want to pin everything on a relationship. Um, but yeah, just take stock of what matters to you, what you see, what are you worth? Like, how is your self-worth? Like,
that's a
the,
great, yeah, those are great comments. And I hope that people that are where you once were are listening
mm,
right now. You've written a couple of books. We're going to talk about those books in just a minute, but you've written some books on helping people recover from divorce. So that guy or gal that's just gone through a divorce and it's so fresh that they're not talking to anybody, or maybe that guy or that gal who's gone through a divorce and they're on a rebound and they just want another person. They don't want to go through the pain. They don't even want to think about it. So I'm just going to put another person in my life to numb the pain. What would you say from some of your divorce recovery books to that person about getting healthy after a divorce instead of just simply moving on? And moving on doesn't mean you're healthy.
no, no. I would say, uh, don't put pressure on yourself to get over it. Um, at a particular point of time. Like don't put pressure on yourself to say like, oh, 6 months from now I got to get over this. Like healing is a process, grieving is a process. You were comparing divorce to death. Well, the recovery is like grieve it. You have to
Absolutely.
grieve it.
Totally
It's
agree.
a
Yep.
different kind of loss, but you have to give yourself permission to grieve. You have to give yourself permission to feel and to experience all the even unpleasant emotions. It's terrifying. It truly is, but it's the only way to the other side, really.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
You've also, and the one of the things about your story that I respect highly, Ginny, is your caution and your patience finding the next mate. And you've written about dating, and I would love for you to give some advice to that guy or gal who's just gone through a divorce. They're not sure they want to open their heart up again, but they also don't even know if they want to go through, don't even know where to start
Yeah,
dating somebody the opposite sex again. So, can you give a piece of
yeah.
advice or two to that person?
Um, well, if you're not sure you want to date, that's okay. Um, don't put pressure on yourself. Like some people might say, "Oh, just get back on the hobby horse,"
That's right. You got to
date.
jump back on the horse, right?
Don't let
Don't do that.
yourself or yeah, don't let yourself or anyone else pressure you into dating. If you think you want to date, do what I did. Start a list. Make a list of all the things, even if it's 100 things that you want, and you're not necessarily going to get them all. I didn't get all on my list, but actually, my new husband, he met over the, he was over and above what I expected. So, don't settle the second time. Make a list of the things that you would want in a second marriage, so you don't have to go through that kind of pain again. And yeah, take your time and be clear on what you want and don't want.
Yeah, this is very powerful for the listeners out there because the worst thing that you could possibly do after settling in the first marriage and having a marriage that was a disaster and it ended in divorce, the worst thing that you could do is date in such a way that you settle again in the second marriage, because in that case, there's no reason why it's going to make it either. If you
No.
don't learn some things, if you don't grow
Yeah.
along the way, and if you don't change a little bit, then maybe you're not ready to start dating again. And I wanted the audience to hear that from a woman who says, I don't even recognize that 20-year-old girl that I was before my first marriage. I'm a totally different person now in a good way, so that you didn't settle all over again for
No.
another guy who's going
No.
to take advantage of you, have an affair, do
No.
worse.
It's better to be it's better to be single and lonely than married and lonely.
Wow. Yeah. I I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah.
What I want people to hear from your story today, and you said this very clearly without using these words. Divorce doesn't have to be the end. It is the end of a relationship, but it doesn't have to be your end. It can be a new and a beautiful beginning, a beginning to a beautiful new part of your life,
Definitely.
only
You
if
could
you do the work,
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah. And you could discover, like, which is what happened to me. You could discover the person you were always meant to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to do the work. And the
Yeah, absolutely.
one
Yeah.
of the things that makes you unbeatable, Jenny, is that you were willing to do the work, the hard work, even facing the fear and the shame, so that you didn't go down the same road twice. There's a ton more that I would love to talk to you about, but we're running out of time. So I want people
Okay.
to find out more about you and about your
Yeah,
books and how they
sure.
can learn more about you. What's the best way for people to learn more about you?
They can go to my website, JennyEAlexander.com,
All right.
and all my books are on there, and I have a little blog on there too. So,
And we'll put, by the way, if you're driving right now and listening to this thing or listen to it at the airport, we'll put a link to her website in the notes to this episode. But she's got lots of books, not just about dieting, not just about divorce recovery, other books on her website too. And you can find all of those books at her website.
yeah,
So, JennyEAlexander.com.
yeah. Don't forget the other ones. You'll go to an author's page in the UK.
Yes. And again, there's a link to it right in the notes to this episode.
Yeah,
Jenny, thank you for taking some time and being with me on this
thank you.
episode. You really are an unbeatable woman.
Well, thank you so much. My husband would agree.
I hope you would agree too.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hope you felt like Jenny really is unbeatable. Because after I hear this woman's story, the courage that it took for her to face her fears and address the challenges that she was going to have to go through to just get healthy again and make herself willing to put herself out there and finally meet her current husband, Curtis. I believe the divorce doesn't have to be the death of a dream. Yes, it's the death of a marriage. It doesn't have to be the death of a dream. It could be the beginning of a new life, but you're going to have to do the work. So Jenny, thank you for being my guest on this episode of Unbeatable. And I want to thank everybody else who tuned in to watch on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast platform. I hope you're staying connected with each other. I hope you're staying connected with me on social media. We're out there on just about all of the social media platforms. And if you haven't already connected with us, go ahead and search for us at Unbeatable Podcast. Put in at Unbeatable Podcast in the search and you'll find us on almost all of the social media platforms. You'll also find Drew Arbuckle. And Drew, we want to recognize you just because of how engaged you are. Thanks for being with us. Guys, we have just a couple more episodes and then we're going to roll right into this new and very exciting television show that we're going to launch. So stay tuned for next week's guest. Thanks for joining me. See you back here next week.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.